Okay guys, continuing on with our molecular modeling lab, and under number 3 on your report is a question about nomenclature. Now you will be doing some of this in lecture, but probably not at the perfect time as you're doing this, so I'm going to give you all the help I can possibly give you so that you know what is going on here. So the molecule that they drew for you, I just copied it directly from your report sheet, looks like this. And they want you to figure out how to name it correctly. And when you're talking about nomenclature of hydrocarbons, meaning carbon chains containing hydrogens, there are certain very important rules to follow. And here the point of this exercise is to illustrate the fact that you should always look for the longest carbon chain. So when you first look at this molecule, it may appear as though there are only 3 carbons, 1, 2, 3 in the chain. And if you have only 1 carbon, it would be methane, 2 carbons ethane, 3 carbons would be propane, 4 carbons butane, and so on. 5 carbons, for example, pentane. So in this situation, you might think this would be propane, but the trick here is to look a little closer so you can actually see that it may not, the longest chain may not be the one that's written straight like this. It may be something that is going in zigzag form. So in this case, if we look a little closer, we'll notice that the longest chain actually contains 4 carbons, and there are 2 different ways to count this. One would be starting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see I numbered them, but it can also go possibly 1, 2, 3, 4. So either way, the longest chain in this case would be considered 4 carbons. So in our name we must have the ending butane. Butane stands for 4 carbons in the main chain. But no matter how we count, if I count the way I numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, I still have to account for this carbon, which is considered sort of on the side here, so it's not in the main chain, it's a branch, it's called a branch. So here we have to include in our name the fact that off of carbon number 2, we have a methyl group, and so the correct name for the substance would be 2-methyl-butane. 2 represents the number of the carbon off of which the branching is occurring. So in this case, it's off of 2nd carbon. You might say, wait a second, what if you numbered like you showed alternative numbering, 1, 2, 3, 4? Well, guess what? If we numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, we would still have this methyl here. This methyl would now be considered in the main chain, but this methyl here would still be off of the 2nd carbon, so it wouldn't change anything. You might say, why don't you count 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, or 1, 2, 3, 4 that way? There is a very good reason for that, and rules of nomenclature dictate very clearly, to avoid confusion, that when we have a branch like this, the number of the carbon off of which branching is occurring must have the smallest number possible. So if I went 1, 2, 3, 4, I would have to number this one number 3, right? So it would be 3-methylbutane, but it would be incorrect because, again, nomenclature clearly tells us that the number of the carbon off of which branching is occurring must be the smallest possible. That is why the correct name here would be 2-methylbutane. And I went ahead and I made models for this. So we can take a look at this. So let's first count, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4 in my main chain. Let me turn it around this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is my 2nd carbon right there. I'm holding onto it right now. This is the 2nd carbon off of which I have an extra methyl group. So this methyl here is the one that's off of main chain. It's sort of on the side. That's the branching one. And so remember how I'm counting. I'm always counting from the side closest to the where branching is occurring. So this would be number 1, this would be number 2, 3, and 4. So the correct name for this particular molecule would be 2-methyl butane, because there's 4 carbons in the main chain. So in nature, of course, there's constant rotation like this. So they rotate, and they actually find a position where all hydrogens are as far as possible from each other, so that there's the least interaction between them. So they try to find a position where they're farthest away from each other. So this is what this molecule would look like in nature. So hopefully we got that, and you will have more exercises on nomenclature later in the lecture. Hopefully this little exercise will help you understand how organic nomenclature works. And then now we're proceeding with so-called geometric isomers. So we looked at regular isomers earlier, and now we're looking at a little bit different kind of isomers. So here you not only have the same exact molecular formula, you also have the same structure. However, you have different spatial arrangement of certain portions of the molecules which make them different. So the compound we're considering here is called 2-butene. So why not butane? Well, this E here is actually very, very important, because when you get A switched out for an E like this, that immediately tells you, it's another one of those quirks of nomenclature. This E here shows that there is a double bond between carbons in the molecule. 2 here represents the number of a carbon off of which double bond is occurring. So butene means 4 carbons in the chain, right? So total of 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 butene indicates the location of the double bond between the second and the third carbon. So why would we consider existence of some sort of weird geometric isomers for this particular molecule? Well, take a close look. Look at this carbon here. It has a hydrogen attached to this carbon and a CH3. And hydrogen and CH3 are, of course, 2 very different groupings or substituents, how they're called in organic chemistry. And this carbon as well has a hydrogen and a CH3. So this hydrogen and this methyl are both attached to this carbon over here. So what happens when we get these geometric isomers? Well, what happens is we get them arranged in different way around the double bond. So the 2 possible isomers we can have here would be a cis isomer versus a trans isomer. How do we distinguish between them? Well, according to rules of nomenclature, the one isomer where larger groups, in this case methyls, are on the same side of double bond, this would be considered cis isomer. And when the 2 larger groups, again methyls, are on the opposite sides of the double bond, that would be considered trans isomer. So why do these exist? Well, they exist because of a special feature of the double bond and the way the double bond is actually formed. These 2 are different from each other. They have slightly different physical properties and different chemical properties, despite the fact that the structure is the same and molecular formula is the same. But the spatial arrangement is different. Same side, by the way, I could have drawn both of these down and hydrogens up. It would still be a cis. I just wanted to point that out. But the fact is, the double bond, whenever you have a double bond, it's very different from when you have a single bond. And before we look at the actual cis and trans isomers or models, I want to show you this. So take a look at this. These are just 2 carbons that are connected by a single bond. What this kit does, it illustrates really well the fact that I can easily rotate around a single bond. But how do we make a double bond with this kit? Well, I mentioned those thin sticks here in addition to fatter, shorter ones. So these longer, more flexible ones are used to make a double bond. And so what I did here is I made a double bond with these type of longer sticks. Now look at this. Can I rotate around the double bond? I'm really trying and I really don't want to break it. So you can see that I cannot rotate around the double bond. And so once I place my substituents, my other atoms around these carbons, they're going to be fixed, frozen in space. Now, one thing that this model does not represent really well is the fact that these two bonds here, the part of the double bond, they're not the same. Here you may think that they're the same. They're not. And so this brings me to a point as to why we can't turn cis into trans. Well, turning cis into trans or vice versa would require us to rotate around the double bond. And this is not possible because of how this double bond is formed. And the thing about this is the two bonds that form the double bond are not the same. One of them is called sigma bond. It's when the two orbitals overlap in the same plane where nuclei of the carbon atoms are. So this would be this one here, this type of situation. And so this would be two overlapping orbitals, and you can easily rotate around the sigma bond. But then, in order to make a double bond, the second bond in the double bond is so-called pi bond. Pi bond is formed by non-hybridized p orbitals of each carbon. These p orbitals stick up in the plane perpendicular to the plane where nuclei are. So this is where nuclei are, and the p orbitals are perpendicular to that plane, and they overlap up above and down below the plane. Now, I'm not a good artist at all. I tried really hard to draw it, and I drew them in red to sort of show you the difference between sigma and pi. I will try to include some other resources for you on Canvas where it's illustrated much better digitally. And so, because of pi bond and because of how it is formed, the fact that the orbitals are overlapping above and below the plane, this is what freezes the molecule in space. So if I ask you on the exam or quiz why cis cannot be turned into trans, you cannot just say, well, it's because of double bond, or, well, it's because there's a pi bond. You have to explain, you have to go into detail, and you have to explain that p orbital is produced by overlapping of unhybridized p orbitals above and below the plane of the nuclei, and that's what basically freezes the molecule in space. So this concludes our second video. In the next one, we will talk about various hybridizations of carbon and geometries and bond angles that exist. Wait, I forgot to show you the molecule, I believe, or the molecules. That would be kind of important here. So let's start with this one. So I'm going to ask you a question. Take a look at this. So this is my double bond right here. These are my two carbons connected by a double bond. And these are my two methyls, and these are my two hydrogens. So what do you think? Is it cis or is it trans? Hopefully you can answer this question easily now. See how this is missing one hydrogen. I apologize. So this methyl here is looking up, while this methyl here is looking down. So this is first of the two geometric isomers, and hopefully you can name this one. And now let's contrast it to this one. So methyl, methyl, both are pointing up, hydrogen, hydrogen, both are pointing down. And see, I cannot rotate, so I can turn so that methyl will be pointing down. Let me turn it around, so see that you can also represent this with both methyls pointing down and hydrogens up. So as long as methyls are on the same side, it does not matter whether they're up or down. It'd still be another geometric isomer, which you hopefully now can name. Next, I'm just gonna quickly show you them side by side so you can see the difference. And from the other angle, like this. Okay, now we're done with this part.